Remember that we are live streaming, and because Matua Gary isn't here, I'm going to open with karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te toa, kia mā kina ki ota, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hia ki ana te atākura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. So just in terms of a bit of a translation, get prepared for the westerly and for the southerly. It will be icy cold inland and icy cold on the shore. May the dawn rise red-tipped on ice, on snow, on frost. A little bit probably relevant for what's going on in the council space at the moment, but nonetheless, welcome. I don't think we've got any public members today, but welcome to elected members, independent member Whai Joanne, and to the Matamata-Piako District Council team. I think we need to start with our apologies, of which we have Matua Gary Thompson and Deputy Mayor James Thomas, which I think we need to move.
I'm happy to move.
Yeah,
I'll second.
Yeah, cool. All those in favour, please say aye.
I'll move. Okay,
it's Kumana carried. Any declarations of interest?
Disinterest.
I'll take that as a no. The next one is the confirmation of two sets of minutes. So the first being for the 5th of December 2023. Any comments on those minutes? Otherwise, I'll ask for a move and a seconder. I'm happy to move.
I'll second.
By Joanne is seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Okay, it's Kumana. And similarly for the 23rd of January 2024. And I know that the pack was reasonably large, so I understand. So I'll move those ones as well. We have no comments.
And I'll second.
And then seconding. Okay. We've got a bit of an agenda today, so thank you in advance for all the hard work that would have gone into reading all the papers and also prepping the papers. So kia ora. The first item that we have on the agenda today is my chair report, which I'm going to take as read. Just a quick summary that I continue to be privileged to attend the OAG forums on behalf of the Matamata-Piako District Council. There is one on local government, which is, in my mind, we're past that space now. It's really around the options for the long-term plan and the consultation documents. There was also one in relation to the economy, and I'm not an economist, but there was quite some interesting insights there. And the next hui is this Friday on cyber security, so I'm looking forward to that one. And then I was also privileged to attend hui with some Matamata-Piako District Council staff around the LGP and the CD, around risk management as well. So Kelly coming on board into a space that now encapsulates risk. She's working with Leslie to really focus on our strategic risks and our operational risks. And I'm looking forward to what they bring to our next hui. I'm also meeting with staff in relation to 3 orders about some of the issues they're dealing with at the moment, but the risks in that space moving forward. And I also noticed in noted in my report a privacy breach, an isolated privacy breach that has been notified to the privacy officer, to our privacy officer, to the privacy commissioner. An investigation is and will take place, and we expect the outcome at our next risk and assurance committee hui. So I hope that answers any questions. Or concerns or comments or any questions you'd like me to take to the cyber forum and asking them about what that could mean for us. Oh, shush now. Kia ora.
Yes, you've got a question, Jolene, just around what's your view? They talk about obviously consultation documents audited, not audited, including impacts for councils not having their CVs audited. From a risk and assurance perspective, is it more prudent to be audited up front than, than risk and not audited view? Like, what was the dialogue like around that? I'm interested to understand.
Yeah, it's not something that they necessarily delved deep into, but what I would say from my perspective is it gives a level of assurance when you do go through the audit process. But in fairness to Audit New Zealand, when they are undertaking the audit of the long-term plan, they are also considering the consultation document as well. So it probably, well, obviously not to the same level of extent of doing a full audit, but it might be considered more like a review, I would imagine. So from my perspective, the more prudent that we can be in terms of transparency to our stakeholders around what's been happening and what that consultation will look like and what the next 10 years will look like, the better. Yeah.
Thank you. It's reassuring.
And the note you here was moving towards a sustainable fee in 2027. Yeah, this has been frustrating for us, this whole process, because we think it's just over the top. What do they mean by a sustainable fee?
So and I think Renee's online as well, and welcome to comment as well, Renee. So from my perspective, my sense was the amount of audit work that they were putting into the long-term plan process cost them more than they were billing, and from their perspective, and also their expectation over the next couple of years was see how it was going to go, so they get an idea of what a realistic fee would look like. But Renee looks like she's poised to respond as well. Kia ora, Renee, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It's just for us, it's trying to balance our hours and our fees. So our income comes obviously from the fees that we raise. That is worked out by taking the hours that we take on a job and obviously feeing the respective rates on that. So there has been a mismatch in the past with hours and our recovery. So that if they talk about that, getting to that right levels, it's getting to the right amount of hours to do the job, and then obviously the fee connected to those hours.
And I might also answer a little bit more in terms of where I think you were going with that, with the line of questioning and the amount of information that's required by audit. Ultimately, they're there to make sure that we're doing things in relation to the particular standards, and they just need to satisfy what they're being asked to satisfy. And I feel for the audit team and our team as well that would have had to answer those questions, whereas they're in a position that that's what they're being required to do too. Happy to. Oh, Helena.
Please accept my most humble apologies for my darling.
Sorry, Bruce. I don't think we're going to get the answer.
No, it's just that there seems to be an ever-increasing overload rather than a straight audit. I don't know. The processes of audit are changing. That's where I'm coming from. How much more and more and more are we going to get?
And I think you could see Renee to a certain extent in relation to that. And I think that's something for central government to consider in terms of the added value that the audit and assurance processes provide versus the stakeholders and their expectation in that space too. But valid point. Yeah. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll ask for a movement in that place. We'll move. Sure. Yeah, let me do that for you. Yeah, sure. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Cool, Gary. Thank you. Over to you, Don, in relation to the Chief Executive update.
Yeah, some very comments. Thanks, Madam Chair. Just commenting on the LTP, where we woke up this morning without any new requests coming from audit, which is a pleasure. Thank you, Renee, for that. I must admit, without sounding patronising, I had a degree of empathy with Renee and her team. They're subject to direction from the Wellington-based Auditor General's review panel, and at times it's just been the messenger, and probably end up feeling like they're a bit of meat in the sandwich. But that's okay. We're there, which is great, and nothing can doubt, as Manaia remarked to me, the accuracy of the figures of the reports. I mean, they've been trolled through to a high degree. I think everything in there, whilst it's based on assumptions and assessments, based on those assumptions and assessments, the document is accurate. Just as far as the organisation is concerned, a couple of milestone projects. Councillor Jude has mentioned that we're pouring concrete on Morrisville at the Lockerbie water plant, which is really great. And that is a milestone project. But the other one to mention is their submission to Regional Council on our resource consent renewals for our wastewater plants. And the unique thing about that is that it covers the entire district, and that we have got a total nitrogen limit for our combined plants to adhere to. What does that achieve? Well, that achieves an ability to mix and mingle, and the concept actually should apply catchment level. And it's something that I know that I've mentioned to the regional council, and they're sound very open to the idea. As far as the other major projects, they'll no doubt we'll get way through, but we had the latest meeting with the Matamata Stadium people last night. Benaya and his team have been working hard on that, and we expect, sorry, Benaya, what's the timetable around that? They going to, we're out for RFI at the moment. Yep. And what we're seeing in the market, I think, is a little bit more interest. I think there were 40 registrations of interest from all the players that you would hope. So that's a good sign. And the other sign of things turning in the market at the moment is the fact that we just advertised for a planner and we had 68 applications.
Wow.
Yeah.
And another one is there was another, just forget the numbers, but of significance, the numbers of applicants for 2 planning jobs recently have certainly climbed. So there's clear signs that there's a change in the labour market. The restructure, the organisational restructure has gone well. People have settled into their new positions. There's still something to, there's still some more that will occur on 1 July. There were budget constraints to manage, and that's why we delayed some final appointments, and there are some other positions which are only funded for 0.5 of the year, and so we'll be bringing those on in some sort of prioritised manner as appropriate. The 6-month reports on the agenda, I think I asked Benaya this morning for a word that might best describe it, and he said stable. I think that's a fair way of putting it. We can talk about a couple of highlights there at the moment. One, we're getting through more capital, which is great. 2, the actual operating is more affected by loss of revenue than it is by overspend. So, yeah, so Madam Chair, that's just some brief comments.
Just one question, John, with the Lockerbie plant, how's it costing? Like, is it running, any indication that it's running to?
I think the budget, the final budget that's been sent on is about 8.3 million. I think council resolution, the second tender for that, it was 15 million, if you remember. So the 8.3.
No, that was what we would allow you to go to.
Correct. So we're well short of that.
Yes.
Watch for the party. Yeah. So I was just thinking something occurred to me while I was listening to it. No, I can't think of it. Oh, I have asked for compliance reports for water and wastewater too, but there's clearly Tamata Arawai are clearly starting to wind up the regulatory oversight. They also have a responsibility in wastewater. They are developing what they call minimum standards to comply with in terms of discharge, and so they're encroaching into regional council territory, and will have oversight to the compliance for wastewater as well as water.
The other thing I should mention in passing is there has been an endorsement at Mayoral Iwi Leaders Forum to progress some work that will be brought back to the individual councils in about July on the pros and cons and feasibility of aggregation of our two waters in particular. So that'll be interesting to see what work comes out of that. And it'll be up to each council in July to decide whether they wish to effectively proceed with any further work. And I hasten to add that work being funded from our transition funding, which was government allocated to allow us to transition to new entities, which aren't happening now, but they've allowed this money to be allocated to that.
Just checking, we have that money in the bank already? We're not.
I think so, yeah, I'm told that, yeah, I haven't seen the bank statement.
It's not a small amount of money. Yeah. Any more questions from the team in relation to Don's report?
Yeah, just a comment, just a thought on that, Don. You talked about Matamata-Piako and encroaching.
Yeah.
So I've had the wrong impression. I would have thought that they were the regulator in determining what the standards would be, and Waikato region would have been making sure they were applied. So are you this is on wastewater.
Well, traditionally wastewater has been, the regulator for wastewater has been the regional council, and effectively that still is the case. The question will be the way consent applications are processed at the moment. There's this public interaction and consideration of different points of view, and proposition is then put to the regional council or consent application, and they choose to apply it or not. There are some legislative frames that they have to work within, like the healthy waters, rivers limits, and all the rest of it. But there's never been anything specifically prescribed in terms of, this must be the total nitrogen into waterways sort of thing. So what the Matamata-Piako are doing, which actually I think will be quite helpful, is specifically make standards of discharge that must be applied as a minimum. Now, I'm assuming that means that if communities want to, they can go more and go higher, but they can't go less.
Yeah, so just a policeman.
Well, for the purpose of that, yes. I'd say off the record, I'm mindful we're in a public meeting, but I'd say there's going to have to be some, and I made the comment on Adrian was on, to Alan Pragnell, who's the chief executive at Matamata-Piako, that in my view, the smaller councils, the compliance monitoring and the compliance responses and effort that has to go into compiling data and so forth, they're the same people that will be dealing with Matamata-Piako as well as regional council. So there's a really good argument that Matamata-Piako and regional councils get their systems and processes aligned so that we're not having to repeat ourselves.
This floors me because I've got a complete misunderstanding of just who sets the rules and who applies them.
Because pre Matamata-Piako, there would have been the national policy statement under the RMA.
Yeah.
And of course, regional council has to give effect to that with their regional policy statement. The councils have to give effect to the regional council. And you've always been able to go a better standard, just not less. But it's the crossover. It's if it's reporting in two directions, that sounds a bit silly. So there's a bit of refinement there. But anyway, that's an efficiency thing operationally that we have to face.
Same pages.
Well, they're ensconced in their building as far as Waikato, the Matamata-Piako enforcement team in the regional council building. They've got fun.
Oh my God, double up with bureaucracy.
So that's the bureaucracy.
So to say, let's. I've got 3 staff full time on compliance monitoring and reporting. 3 for an organisation of this size now.
There's only one not so long
They just
ago.
contract Waikato Regional to be the compliance officers.
Carry it. It's a different story.
What interests me of your, not to say the other isn't interesting, but I'm really interested moving forward in relation to the aggregation of orders
Yes.
and what that looks like. So from my perspective, too soon to talk about it in detail at the moment. It's good to hear that you're flagging that
Yeah.
and what that could look like in the future. And I'm quite keen to understand what our criteria will be
Yeah.
for what's going to be the best for NPDC.
So it's financial and non-financial.
Yeah, yeah, and it's financial and non-financial. I guess it's the consideration of the opportunities to work together for consenting for projects to get better deals, smooth the projects because of the peaks and troughs of work that's going to be done across the district, across the region, and also the career path for staff. The risks of not, and like it's a lot to weigh up, but we're not there yet.
No, and one figure I could throw out there right now is that over the next 10 years in Waikato alone, there is $5.9 billion worth of work scheduled for delivery. The industry just is not capable of delivering that level of work. So what happens under the supply and demand curve? If your supply goes down and your demand goes up, there's only one way the graph goes.
And the risk there is because a lot of the stuff is compliance based, is there's going to have to be some conversations with the regulator, because if you can't get your plant done on time for your consent, you're not going to be compliant. But not everybody can go at the same time, so it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Big picture stuff.
Absolutely. Come on, unless there are any further comments, I'm happy to move. Can I please have a seconder?
Yeah.
We've got Councillor Bruce seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Kia ora. The next item is 8.2, which is the audit management report for 22-23. Kia ora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morena koutou. We have the auditors here with us, so perhaps I can give a brief overview and then if they would like to add anything. We've received the audit management report for Council's annual report of 2022-23, the audit of that. The report sets out a number of matters, mostly relating to Council's internal control processes that were identified by audit during the audit process, and it records Council's responses to these and how Council is addressing these matters. In addition to the issues from the 2022-23 audit, the report also tracks progress on issues raised in previous year's audits.
Renee or Claudia, are you there to make any comments? If you'd like.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we'll take the report as read and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions, Tim? Oh, kia ora.
Oh, no, I meant to turn it on, sorry.
Well, I'll start, shall I?
Yep.
Okay. So if I start to run through the recommendations, I've just got a few questions on them, probably for audit and also potentially Lania as well. So the first one was around the expenditure and the access system, and I'm picking on this one because it's got a priority of urgent. So what I want to understand is how often do we self-review the access to the systems that we have across Council? And then did we self-recognise this issue but continued with that and took on the risk because we didn't have the staff to have that segregation? Or was it noted externally and someone else had to tell us? Go.
To be fair, it was known, but yeah, I should have dealt with it a year ago when we did get someone on board that was able to, do the roles that I used provide backup for. So yeah, it's just a oversight. Yeah.
Okay, right, and that's what we have audit for, right? Excellent. And the other part of the question was in relation to access across the different systems. And it looks like Manai would like to.
Yes, if I could comment on that. Good morning. Kia mana. Here. Mema. And through this last audit, I had to step in to take over the IT systems aspect of the audit because our IT manager was unavailable. And one of the dealings that we had as part of the process, I think there's been an enhanced, expanded process from audit's perspective in terms of the kinds of controls we have in place. And one of the things I had to do was to, this is stuff that our IT manager used to do secondhand. He had a lot of information himself and was able to show how access occurred to all the various modules in our enterprise system. So I had to unpick that myself. And one of the learnings out of that process was, and going through that, is that it would make sense that we relied a lot on one person and his knowledge. And through that, we've identified that we need to change our process to give wider knowledge to that. And as a part of that process, then to make it easier to review, an annual review to occur. He did that himself and he raised questions himself. But I think the expectation out of the audit process rightly is that there's better visibility and better formality of that review.
Good, and just to follow on to that as well. So later on in the management report that talks about IT system changes that are needed to fix some things. So I'm just curious whether those IT system changes are picked up in the LTP, as in we have funding to address the changes that are needed.
So are we talking about, there were some process issues in the management report?
Yeah, there was one about broken authority report.
Oh yeah, that's
reliability. So I'm hearing that we have budget and to address those.
Yeah, that there's a process underway to address that going forward.
Any other questions? Although it's only a beneficial recommendation, I'm just wanting to get a quick update on the fraud policy and when we might see traction in that space in terms of it coming through the risk insurance committee.
Yeah, we actually contracted someone to review the fraud and risk policy, and we had that done last year, correct? So yeah, it has had a review, but there was some extra points that auditor picked out that weren't included in the policy. So at this stage, we haven't set a timeline for the next review. Usually it'll be reviewed within a 3-year period. So if it's seen as a priority, we can do it sooner rather than the 3 years.
Okay, but yeah, I thought I'd seen that, so that's why I was just curious where it was coming up. Okay, cool. And this is probably a question for audit in relation to the PPE capitalisation. So my understanding is that we are meeting the accounting standards, but the recommendation talks about an independent review required. And does that, are you suggesting an independent external or an independent internal review?
We've taken that as being an internal, independent internal review.
Thank
Yes.
you. Excellent. Any other questions on the report? Otherwise, we'll move to the recommendation.
I'm assuming that job cards and forms in here are talking about digital versions of those, not. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, internal versus virtual. Yeah. Back in the day, things. Yeah, that some of us.
Please don't go backwards.
But sometimes they might be more reliable.
Kia ora team, the recommendation is that the information is received and we note the matters identified by Audit New Zealand in its report to Council for the year ended 30 June 2023 and the management responses to those matters. We have Councillor Kevin moving and Fire Joanne seconding. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Well done, carried. Well done. Thanks, team. The next item on the agenda is 8.3, the 6-month report, July to December 2023. Thanks, Anna. Welcome and well done.
We had to present the 6-month report to you all. This is just a kind of date of where we're at 6 months into the year. So this spans 1st of July 2023 to the 31st of December 2023. And so we have the financials as of that period, and then also where we're tracking on our performance measures. So we have 62.
Turn your microphone around with you.
Sure.
Very soft voice.
We have 62 performance measures in total, 36 on track, 15 are not on track as of and 11 are either annual or biannual performance measures. So they're not, we don't have information for those just yet.
Open for questions.
I guess it's more of an observation, and then a thing is some of the things like curbside refuse and recycling services, I assume is because the change in curbside, there's perhaps the more negative response. I guess there's some comments there that would have related to the curbside collection and how that was kicked off. And people probably understand it better now, 6 months on with the national announcement in February, but probably the only observation that I'd make. It's pleasing to see that there is some improvements, though, like the level of satisfaction. So it's really good. Always frustrating from a governance perspective where we sit, but that's local government at the moment, I think, in general.
Didn't look too bad to me.
Is there anything of concern that you see? Are there any trends there that perhaps might be of concern?
There was nothing that really stuck out to me when I was putting these together and gathering data. They're all pretty similar to previous years. There's nothing that's a shock in that sense. So yeah, nothing really that I picked up now.
Yeah, it's great. It's reassuring. That's that question.
Yeah. So thank you. Sorry, Councillor Richards.
So no, I
30 measures are not on track, and 30 measures do not have the information available. I assume they're the same. In terms of the report, 30 measures are not on track, and 13 measures do not have the information.
Yeah.
Is that why they're not on track?
Yeah, no, so that's two different things. So not on track is like they're not quite hitting the target that we had set. The ones that are not don't have information available, I think they have changed since the report was written. So I think it says 13 and 13. So at the moment it's 15 are not on track and 11 don't have information. And so those are two different things. One is the ones that don't have information will be things that are measured every year. We don't have the data like surveys and things like that. And then the ones that aren't on track are things like the customer survey, reset their target for 80% and sitting at 78%. So it's not hitting on like yet, but it might do by the end of the year.
my only comment on that is if you say 30, it would be easier for us to understand if you said these are the ones. There was a short list of what they were, and the ones that aren't on track, and the ones that aren't available. If there was, then we'd know why, and we would be able to say, well, we really need that information, and that's what we should concentrate on. We don't know. Saying 13 doesn't tell us what it is.
You're right. I must say I've got a love-hate relationship with performance measures. I think they have a use. Sometimes
You're not alone.
No.
Certainly not.
Sometimes we over-rely on this end-of-year survey. We struggle to, we hoist ourselves by our own petard at times in terms of the requirement we put on ourselves, and to then actually measure it and to satisfy audits desire for underlying confirmation of that, of the detail of that. And I'm talking, and I'm not, this is not being disrespectful, I am talking
minutiae in the extreme. And when you're dealing with teams out there who've been up to their eyeball bucks in water in the middle of the night, getting them to put out.
I don't dispute that at all, Don. I think, all I was really getting at is that if we have some,
Yeah.
what are they?
Yeah,
So they're at the back of
it just gave me a chance to make a point.
they are at the back of the additional attachment for item 8.3. It's at the back of the full 6-month report. So 2 of those examples are playground safety will be assessed on a regular basis, and 2 inspections were completed outside the set time frame, and 1 inspection date was recorded incorrectly due to human error. That's why it's not on track. Another one was our public toilets. The number of complaints received regarding dissatisfaction with the cleanliness of our public toilets. We set 20 or fewer for a year, so that allows us 10 for 6 months. We had 14.
And we spent a considerable amount of time at council.
Yeah. So it's put in perspective. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
I've got a couple, probably start with Lania, if that's okay. And just for transparency, the funding impact statement shows a deficit of 3.8 million compared to a budgeted deficit of 2.56 million. And then the statement of comprehensive revenue and expenditure shows a surplus of 231,000 compared to a budgeted deficit of 1.43 million. So can you just unpack for people that might not understand what that difference is, what that is, in case there might be somebody out there watching that's like, what does that mean? Thanks.
The reason that we show the 6 months report and we focus on funding impact statements as opposed to the income statement is for the clear fact that it showed you there right now is that the income statement kind of disguises disguises the real situation because of the non-cash movement. So the big ticket item in the income statement at the moment is we've had a gain on sale of some Matamata property of 2.something million, which is sort of disguising the true cash situation. So that's why we've focused on the funding impact statement in the 6 month report.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. And then, although we're saying that there aren't necessarily any concerns, ultimately at the 6 month stage, when from a financial perspective, we're not meeting our target. And so what's the impact in terms of 12 months and then flow on impact in terms of LTP from your perspective? Thank you.
So we've tried to project forward to June here. So I think at the end of June, in terms of our operating, we're at 1.2 million deficit at the 6 month point, and we're saying that could stretch out to 1.7. And most of that is coming from potentially revenue, being short on our revenue, particularly metered water. And then if we don't get that, we don't get the funding from the DIA to cover the shortfall for water, although council has resolved that they will use the proceeds from the sale of that Matamata property to offset that in any case. So, yeah.
Sorry, Lily, just on that point, would those funds ordinarily have gone to debt pay down and therefore impact our ratio?
Yeah, I guess that's where it would go, debt. Mm-hmm.
Just have a question on that. The application to the DIA for that funding. There were criteria, obviously, to be able to use the funding for the waters, which is what this was about. Have we got where are we at with that application? When do we apply for it? Is it being applied for, or is it something?
So we've raised it. Elections occurred in the meantime. I think they're getting, the sense I get is they're a lot tighter than they were. I think we had the misunderstanding that because some other councils had reportedly received that money for operational expense, that didn't necessarily be applied to another council. So
I mean, the bottom line is that you can say at the end of the day, we could have raised our rates by another 800,000 to cover the deficit. And now I know that there was some debate about that at the time. And the hope was that we could get some sort of guidance from DIA that we could cover that from that better off funding as a pure operational deficit. I don't think that's likely to be the case. What we've tried to make a case for is that there are certain projects that we could undertake. For example, what was one that we put in there? Oh, review of all our operational procedures. And the budget for that, I think we put aside 300,000 for that as an argument, and have staff charge their time to that, as opposed to general. So we haven't given up on that, but as I say, I think there's a sense that they're becoming a little bit more strict about what they will allow or won't allow.
And my understanding is we're not unique in that space, and the likelihood of that money coming through is not high. Which is, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's really disappointing because our community needs to understand that that's, their rates would have been that much higher last year on the premise that we were going to plan that we could apply and get this funding. So, yeah, it's pretty disappointing. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, like any government funding, you can never count on it until
it's in your hands.
the check.
So we should have spent that damn stuff.
Yeah. Well, we are hoping, as you know, to expend some of that bit of funding on works that are no longer achievable under the transport choices category. And that's been withdrawn. So that's the intention. Now, whether that comes to pass or not is really in the lap of gods.
All right, another part of your question was how have we addressed this in the LTP going forward, and I guess that $800,000 gap we had from this current year, we've had to rate fund next year. So we're looking at a 25% increase for our three water rates for the first year of the LTP. That's the consequence of it.
The way I might be misunderstanding, but there are a couple of clear things that I think, a couple of really basic engineering type things I would say about these accounts. One, we're spending $2 million. We're $2 million worth of capital further ahead than we had previously been, which I think is a good sign. In other words, we're processing through on that capital work a lot faster. And the second thing, in simple terms, in cash terms, I suppose, we're 1.2 about in deficit. Of that, 700 is loss of revenue and 400 is excess expenditure. And that's really the accountants will probably frown at me, but I think that's the nitty-gritty.
So I guess the challenge that I can see is our hope for metered water. I think this is a regular occurrence that we're overestimating how much metered water revenue we will get. Now, surely if we're budgeting on an amount, if we're overestimating it, at some point we have to meet reality and say that we're not going to receive that revenue.
Well, you're quite right, Madam Chair. That's a good point because, for example, Ingham's are busy at the moment negotiating with us to essentially reduce their purchase of water to virtually a fraction of what it currently is. And that is a very real risk when you are reliant on such large volumes from a few consumers. And I took, Fonterra, an example of that, Morrisville. So clearly, but they're looking for ways because price of water are utilising their bore water more actively and simply reducing their reliance on our consumption. Now we're vulnerable to that, absolutely. No, they haven't pushed the button yet, but they certainly are. And we're trying to negotiate that they take a minimum amount per day in order to ensure we don't get stagnation of water in the system and that sort of thing, just purely from an operation management perspective. But the water consumption this year, from the figures I last saw, Lania, were quite down on even last year, with them.
Yeah, about 390 down. At 6 months on 390,000. Yeah.
And that's predominantly
No, I think that was across the board, wasn't it?
Yeah, Silverfern Farms are probably our biggest user.
So Matt Adrian is raising a fantastic point in terms of the expectation of that revenue coming through and the trend downwards. And when we're budgeting or set for that water, are we budgeting at that lowest daily rate that you're talking about in terms of negotiation?
No, that discussion only occurred in this financial year.
Right.
Okay, so we rely on some historical trend. I mean, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's their choice as to how much water they'll take. We don't have a minimum charge.
So if their consumption drops significantly, what's our obligation to increase production when they then decide they want more
demand? That's been a matter of those discussions.
Because we could, if we had an increase, a need to increase our capacity for other purposes.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We could say, oh well, we've got that. We've got that.
Correct.
Taken over, and then they come back and say, oh, we want what?
So we made it very clear to them that we can't guarantee it. We made that very clear. We said once you decide to
lower
that, and that's your
prerogative. That's your quota.
And you come back in 2 years' time and say, oh, we need more, and in the meantime somebody else has taken up that consumption.
Yes.
We don't necessarily be able to provide it. Now, a perfect example is Open Country Dairy, who historically were consuming our water, decided to go offline and become totally reliant on a bore. Now, if they were to come back tomorrow because their bore collapses or whatever, well, we may not be able to do what we need.
So their bore fails for some purpose, and they can rush it in, and we don't have the capacity.
Well, we may not, no. Well, I mean, obviously we'll try to.
I'm just saying you've made it quite clear that they won't get it.
No, we can't make guarantees.
Two issues. One's a financial one and one's a strategic one with these organisations. But the risk I see is that we're under budgeting because we're forecasting a revenue that we haven't achieved for a couple of years now. And when are we going to address it and actually be a little bit more,
or rather be proactive about addressing it versus not, and yet having to go out to the public again and say, actually, this happened. We need more money from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think as the finance managers explained, we have made up that deficit now for next year. That's what that budget addresses. I'm not sure where we land at, Lana. Do you know off the top of your head?
I mean, we still have a reliance on this, on our metered water volumes staying as it had been. I think for the 12 months ahead, there wasn't anything to suggest that they were going to turn off the tap in the next 12 months.
No.
So but I mean, we're obviously going to have to monitor it and address it. And we've been quite clear in our assumptions in the LTP that it's a risk area.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of quick questions in relation to the performance measures. So I hear that we're looking good to be on track as much as possible by the end of the year. In there, in the measure, there are a couple that I was concerned about, but I'm hoping that the timing, I'll talk to it specifically on page 22 of 31. It talks a bit about the percentage of community satisfied with the councillors and the mayor. And so at the moment, it's not, sorry, I don't think we're achieving it yet. However, with what's going on in the LTP space and consultation space, there is the possibility that it will trend down. So are we taking those types of things into account in terms of what the year end is going to look like from a recovery perspective?
I mean, we definitely would, and like the annual report, we can say give that kind of background. We are also expecting, so this that particular survey is run by a survey provider, and so this was between 1 July and 31 December, so it could well be we get the third quarter from January to March, and it could increase it because they've now obviously interviewed more people. It could be a better response because as it stands, there's 200 people out of 400 that they will survey. So it is likely it could rise in that third quarter, and then by the time the LTP comes out March, April, it could definitely be a factor.
And then the lowest one, I think, and I know it was the curbside, as we expect always, the curbside rubbish and recycling, where I think the target was 80 and we're sitting at 66. So it's just, these are things that we're probably expecting anyway. On the percentage of residents satisfied with the transfer stations, I actually thought that the measure was on track, not off track. I didn't quite understand that one.
There might have been a mistake in formatting that it was 62.
The target was 60, but the track was 62 bits.
To my memory, that was actually okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's okay. And then just in terms of the responses that the people are giving when they are surveyed, do those responses align to what council had agreed last year about satisfied? I can't remember what we landed on.
We went round and round.
It's next year.
Thank you.
Neutral controls these.
Well, just getting a sense of what that will look like, because there are quite a few, obviously, that sit on the fence, and when we've got measures that require satisfied or very satisfied, and you've got 30% that sit on the fence.
Yeah.
You're
bigger no matter what.
Yeah. So if we go back to the recommendation, which is just to receive the report, I'm happy to move. The agency, please say aye. Against, it's a work team, well done. The next item is 8.4, which is the AEL for the long-term plan 2024 to 2034. Do we have any? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can give a brief overview and then would like to add comment. So council have received the audit engagement letter for the audit of the long-term plan 2024 to 34 and the consultation document. The letter sets out the terms of engagement, the areas of audit emphasis, the audit fees and audit scope and objectives, which are to assess whether the consultation document and the plan meet their statutory purposes and to assess the quality of the information and assumptions on which they are based. Also attached to this report is the audit engagement letter previously received for the audits of the annual report for the years ending 30th of June 23, 24 and 25.
Renee, any comment from you? I think this is signed already, right?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, this has been signed yet. So also just happy to take any questions if anybody has a question around this engagement letter.
Any questions, team, other than the depth of the questioning and the cost of compliance in terms of resource and money to councils and ultimately ratepayers and residents? Just thought I'd jump in front of that one. Otherwise, the recommendation is to receive the AEL I'm happy to move. Can I have a seconder? By Joanne seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, come by that, carried. I think we're ahead of time. So I just want to ask, Sandra, you're in a position to talk to item 8.9, which is the policy register. It's okay if you're not. Cup of tea's a good time.
I'm more than happy to come chat about that. Sorry.
Congratulations, you happen to be in the room. People up and go, oh, yes. So, just while Sandra settles in, it's 8.9, the policy register update.
What page?
62.
Oh. Wait a minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we've got here is just an update on our various policies that either go out for consultation or can go out for consultation. So we've got a register here so that obviously none of these policies lapse. What we're presenting here today is those that are due for review this year. Those have all just been presented to Council last week in terms of the smoke-free, the legal highs and the dangerous, affected and unsanitary buildings. So all of those will go out for consultation alongside your long-term plan. And then in the table, we've got the rough timeline of where it is. Things are moving ever so slightly with some of those decisions, but we're generally on track with all of those in terms of the hearing and everything and the deliberations. And this was just an update as to what's coming up next. So you'll see the ginormous list of policies in there. This is the way that our team keeps track of them to make sure that none of them lapse. Under legislation, a number of them have leeway for up to 2 years, such as your bylaws, for those to lapse where they do not go out of function for council. We don't like to let that happen, but every now and then, if they all come up for review at the same time as a long-term plan, for example, they may be done the following year. And our team generally try and do these outside of your long-term plan year if possible, so that you're not kind of going out with 10 different documents. You're going out with the smaller documents in a separate year. Policies such as your dangerous and unsanitary buildings have a 5-year requirement, so they obviously do fall in an LTP year every now and then, whereas a lot of the policies have 3-year reviews, so that those are a bit easier. Happy to try and help with any questions.
Considering that, considering that the smoke-free law has been repealed, what's the impact of the smoke-free policy?
So ours is a policy that is unenforceable by council, so it's more of a educational policy, so that we don't have fines or anything like that. If you want to implement that, you need to go through a bylaw process. So the policy's there to give the community the ability to say, hey, my kids are playing in the playground, you're actually not allowed to smoke there, and gives us the ability to pop up signage. It's really just an education tool. Most councils do it. And the reason we put the policy in place in the first place is because the District Health Board at the time and a number of other organisations, Cancer Society, came through and presented to council and requested that we pop a policy in place to cover those council affected areas. Adrian, you might like to add something for the policy?
Yeah, we were one of the last councils in New Zealand to actually adopt the policy. I do recall that. We also included vaping in the policy as well, because we had that opportunity to. And people generally do abide by it. You know, my observations, especially with network groups and stuff like that. But they still tend to go out and smoke outside the confines of the network group, but you can't. The challenge for us is people have a choice, and it's very hard to give up smoking when you're hooked on it, and that's as much as we'd like to see it disappear. The vaping has also become a bit of a problem, but this is the best we've got. And I think our policy would only minor tweaks, really, wasn't it? It was from a policy perspective that we've tidied it up.
Yeah, and it was those changes to the legislation that we made quite clear and took out of those policies, but still feel like the policy is relevant. And I guess that's what we're asking our community, is it still relevant policy?
And there was some conversation around whether we should be putting it with the LTP or just putting them through. But for transparency, doing it all at once. People can pick and choose what they want to submit on or take that effect. But this is about transparency and community participation. So where it's needed.
I really support that. I'm with the chairperson of the smoke-free coalition legislation was being written up. And I think that this is where council can take a lead, to keep and code. We worked really hard for people and for policy to be integrated into services everywhere. Of course, when I mentioned that smoke-free bars and stuff are coming out, my cousins in Australia, they just laughed at me and said it never happened. And I think they went over first before we did. And I do know that one of the nieces who's on television right now, she said, look, I sang for away kore information all around the country with my mother to ensure that, people, I sang for free food. She said she was only a teenager. But, I think the council has a real lead in this without even being the, because I know that we're doing the same thing with marae being smoke-free as well. And there are some marae that aren't smoke-free, but we'll still encourage them to do that.
If I may add to that, Matua Gary actually mentioned this at our meeting about us showing some leadership, and I think it sits outside of this policy, but I guess that is something that we could do from a leadership perspective, is that, we respect that smoking is hard to give up, but we're trying to, show some leadership in that space. So
yeah, the policy team are going to have a chat with our comms team about, once it's all gone through, after all the long-term plan stuff through in our community, through the consultation, talk about how the best way to educate our community about not being allowed to smoke at playgrounds and why. And so we're going to work with our comms team. They don't know it yet, but we will get in touch with them once the consultation's done to do a bit of an education campaign when we can.
And are legal highs vaping, or are they something else? What are they, legal highs?
there are none.
Yeah.
There are none at the moment.
Council is a legal high.
So those were the substances that came in for a very short period of time, around about 10 years ago now. So they were available at the time, and councils had to rush to get a policy in place to dictate where the shops could be, so that you couldn't have multiple shops in a small little town like this one. And so whilst there are no legal highs at the moment, the legislation is still there that there could be some approved if they are safe. So given the work and the legal opinions needed to get our policy in place, council have decided to keep the policy should they ever be approved. And then we're limited, we've got them situated where they would be allowed to be a certain number of metres away from sensitive sites, so not close to schools, not close to each other, so you couldn't have 3 shops in a row in your main street or anything like that. So we thought prudent to keep the policy in place should it ever come up again.
I've got a couple of process questions in relation to policy in terms of how it works. So I'm trying to understand, with the long list of all the policies that are there, who's responsible for balancing that we've got the policies that we need, and sometimes there might be some that we might be able to consolidate, so we're not having to do a whole lot of work more regularly.
So some of our bylaws we certainly review in terms of can they be consolidated. I guess the need for additional or less policies comes from that governance level.
My focus on that one is probably the internal ones, because when I look at them, I think some of them could probably be consolidated. So we've got ones in relation to training, discipline, stress. I'm not saying that they're a nice match, but there are some probably people and wellness ones that we might want to consider consolidating, as an option. And then another thing I'm trying to understand is, if a policy is overdue, where does the responsibility lie? And it might be the same response that I heard just recently in terms of SPAG, but I mean, where does that sit?
So it depends who the owner of the policy is. A lot of the external facing policies are managed by our policy team and the SPAG team. So they're responsible for ensuring those hit those requirements. Otherwise, we contact the person or the team responsible and work with them if they need assistance. But people and wellness team, for example, do their own internal policies, and we keep track of them so that we've got the register up to date. So it lies with the responsible team.
And does your process outline which which policies need to go to council for review. And ultimately, I'm trying to understand which ones need to come here, so we could look and easily find which ones will need to come through this particular committee.
So it definitely had which ones council need to approve versus which ones the executive team can approve, being those internal type policies. We don't have in here which ones to date need to come through the risk and assurance committee, but that could certainly be something that we could work with you on, adding that layer in.
Just from my perspective, just transparency of what the expectation is in relation to policy. It was all the clarity that I was trying to get. So we know what that looks like, and ideally we'd have it featured in our work program for the year. So we would see that 2024, these are the policies that are due for review. We should be expecting them coming through the committee at this particular stage.
And I guess it's a conversation around whether the committee wants to see the draft policy or wants to see the risk planning up front versus the draft policy. So
I think I like this option.
Like for practicality, I think it's more straightforward for council to deal with it because we meet monthly, whereas the timeframes, I think I guess what is the purpose? Is it from a risk assurance perspective that there are these policies, these ones are due, they aren't being done, why aren't they being done? That's probably more the question rather than us as a risk insurance having involvement of what's in the policy.
Yeah, there are certain policies that generally come through this space that will be for, disclosures. So just having visibility of which ones those are so that they can be scheduled on the work program. And yes, to your point, us looking at the register regularly and go, it would be nice to have some stats on them. So like a reg status of which ones are overdue, that kind of thing. Just that we can easily say to council, this is what the picture of policy looks like. My focus predominantly was going to be on the internal facing ones versus the external, because that's where I thought that this committee was.
We can have a little review of that and add some into your work program and have a chat to you about which ones, if we've got the right ones on there.
There are only 142 of them, so
not many.
So it's quite a few to get done. So well done, team.
And to your point as well, that consolidation is sometimes around, do we really need to have that particular internal policy anymore? Can it be added as a paragraph in another one?
We've got some number of policies that perhaps we feel could do that, and legislation dictates that they be their own separate policy. So you've got those bits to grapple with as well.
Appreciate that. So no other questions. And thank you for your flexibility to come forward sooner than expected. So, Kevin, could we please have a mover? Now Adrian is moving that we received the report, and Councillor Kevin seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, Kwamana. Morning to you if you'd like.
Yeah.
at home ratings.
Round wise.
Welcome back, team. We are at 8.5 on our agenda, which is the review of supporting information and consultation for the consultation document and the long-term plan. I think I butchered that title, but nonetheless, I think you know what I'm talking about. I'd imagine, yes, welcome back to the Audit New Zealand team, and over to Anne. Yep, kia ora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this report outlines the key building blocks that together bring Council to the point of taking the draft long-term plan consultation document out for public consultation. The report is organised into 4 parts, so I thought I'd just give a brief overview of each part. So part 1 outlines the documents that make up the supporting information to the consultation document, namely the draft long-term plan and a number of policies. Council's draft long-term plan for 2024 to 34 has a focus on affordability, keeping rates as affordable as possible for the community by prioritising the must-do projects and doing only a handful of other should-do projects. 4 key drivers are referred to throughout: growth and demand, climate change and resilience, compliance, and affordability, and the challenge of finding a balance between them. Section 3 of the plan, the financial strategy, outlines Council's financial goals: maintaining Council's current levels of service, improving some levels of service where this complements Council's vision, setting prudent limits on rates and rate increases, and setting prudent limits on debt. And the strategy describes the various approaches that Council is taking to achieve these goals. Section 4, the infrastructure strategy, alongside detailed discussions on each of Council's groups of activities, identifies 6 key challenges facing Council in the infrastructure space and the options Council has to respond. The challenges identified are investment in roading renewal, meeting water demand, prioritising capital projects, responding to climate change, servicing growth, and meeting waste minimisation targets. Some of the risks identified in Council's approach across the plan include our ability to deliver on our capital programme, Council's intention to set an unbalanced budget, and Council's approach to managing debt. A full set of assumptions on which Council's decision-making is based are set out in Section 2 of the plan, with the level of uncertainty and implications described for each. As a whole, the long-term plan describes Council's planned activities and community outcomes for the district over the next 10 years and provides a basis for accountability to the community. The policies that make up the other part of the supporting information are the liability management policy and investment policy, development contributions, revenue and financing, and rates remission and postponement policies, and the fees and charges. So that's Section 1. Section 2 of the report.
I want to take questions on Section 1.
As you wish.
Just clarification for me. What is an unbalanced budget?
Yes. So the Act requires that your operating revenues match your operating expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So included in your operating expenses, a big one is depreciation. And in our budget, we're saying we're not going to fully fund the depreciation expense. So that accounts for the biggest portion of our unbalanced budget across the whole 10 years. The other area where we are, the other area is we've got quite a big desludging program that's going to take, we're going to do it over 5 years. And we've said, in terms of affordability, we just don't think the community can afford that straight up. So we're going to fund that over 15 years and do the work over 5. So effectively, we're borrowing to do that work. So in that case, we're not, our revenue won't match our expenditure.
Thank you.
Any other questions on part one? No?
Yes, just from the unbalanced budget, what percentage or what's the gap just between balanced and non-balanced? Like, is there an amount?
Yeah, I think from memory, it's around 5 million each year and ramps up. So about 3 million of that is roading depreciation. So it's for our roading depreciation, we're saying our assumption is that Waka Kotahi will continue to fund us at 51% for our renewing our assets. So that's the chunk we're not funding.
Yeah.
Average of 3.2 million.
Yeah. Not a small amount of money, but
No.
I mean, Waka Kotahi don't make the decisions for some time now. They're currently up for consultation on the Drive GPS. They have indicated that they will put more money into renewable, but we don't know that yet. I also think, from memory, and Fiona might have more information on this than I, that the view is that our network is at a relatively high standard. In other words, I would interpret that to mean we can afford to allow it to deteriorate and sweat it. Thank you.
Oh,
It's not a straight way of putting it.
just again for my clarification, the 1 to 6 investment in roading, meeting water demand, etc., etc. Who decides, or does the work determine how much you do in each section, in each of those sections? Like if we're
In a category.
Yeah.
Okay, a funding category.
Yeah, in a funding category.
So we can swap between categories. And I talked with Susan Kamshoff about this the other day, who manages the budget overall. So if Waka Kotahi do make more money available for renewals and for maintenance, there is a possibility we could take that from another category to match if there's any additional funding allowed. So there is that opportunity too. So not all is lost, but we've just got no certainty at this point.
Okay, so in the long-term plan, so you have these priorities. Some of it depends on doing that.
Yeah.
Like we're only going to do 75% of the work, but Waka Kotahi fronts up with a whole lot, so we'll do 80% and take 5% off somewhere else.
We'll still do 75, but we'd swap 5. Yeah.
I know that's basic, but that's
I understand. Yeah. So
what's missing in the?
I mean, we could have made an assumption. For example, we could have made an assumption that Waka Kotahi will come through with this in the end and will get refunded, because we'd have to 100% fund it, or fund our share and do less work. But it still means 50% of how much was it?
3 million.
3 million, 50% of 3 million. Which you spend on straight maintenance, there's another 4 or 5% of the rates. So they will give us money, but we must match it somehow.
What I might do is just go back to Anne and Nani if they've got any comments in relation to the rest of the book, because I think we dove straight into part 2.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all good. That's all good. We're flexible. So did you have any further comments in relation to the report?
Do you mean in terms of the other sections?
Yeah. So if you've got anything else to say in relation to those ones, if I get the sense that we're ready to jump in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so part 2 does just go a little more into what's involved, legislative requirements with the unbalanced budget, how council needs to resolve that the decision is prudent, taking various factors into account, and must set out the reasons and implications for that decision. Yeah, and the factors, reasons and implications are set out in section 3, the financial strategy, and section 6, the financials of the plan. And then in the report, part 3 just tells you a little bit more about the consultation document itself. It sets out that council's approach to the long-term plan is this focus on affordability, and how council will seek to achieve that. And sets out the 9 topics on which council is seeking public feedback. The consultation is open for a month from the 21st of March to the 21st of April. And a large focus for the consultation process is a website has been developed with some interactive elements, and that is the focus for the means of consulting. And then part 4 of the report is about the audit opinion on the consultation document, which at this stage is a draft, and perhaps I'll leave it for audit to talk to that.
Over to you, Renee. Hilda.
Thank you. Sorry, my phone started to ring just as I started to talk. The audit of the consultation document has been completed, except for 2 items, which I will come back to. The conclusion that we are at this stage is, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The conclusion we have reached is that the consultation document provides an effective basis for public consultation. It fairly represents the matters proposed for inclusion in your long-term plan, and it identifies and explains the main issues, choices, and consequences of those choices. Also, the information and assumptions underlying the information in the consultation document are reasonable. So I mentioned these 2 final items, so we are busy just wrapping up a couple of final completion work papers today still, which will be reviewed and documented in the file. We are also busy checking the final consistency checks between the documents we received yesterday, the full pack, just to make sure that that all ties back to our audit work, and the team is busy doing that work as we speak. We don't foresee any issues, and those items should be completed by close of business today. So therefore, we are in a position to give verbal clearance to you today, subject to those 2 matters that we just need to close off still today. It's been quite a journey from where we started with the consultation document and underlying information. And we would just like to thank management and council for their support during the process. Happy to take any questions that you might have.
Renee, I'll just ask a quick question on those 2 final items. They are under your control, not under Matamata-Piako District Council staff members needing to do anything.
Nothing from council's side. It is our review, our levels of review that we just need to conclude.
Excellent. Thank you for that confirmation. Sure. Yeah, very much so. Over to the committee for any questions in relation to this. So thank you, Renee, for that.
I think you're just teasing me there, Renee. It's starting to make me sweat.
And we've got quite a bit of time on the agenda because there is quite a lot to consider in this space. And just want to recognise and reiterate what Renee was saying as well. There's a lot of work that's gone into it and would have been a journey for everyone involved. So thank you to the team. And also to the elected members that probably got a little bit cross-eyed too in terms of reading the different versions. So, kia ora.
Time to go. I got to just reading the draft.
I guess probably the question that I have, obviously been reasonably close to it, is were we as council unrealistic in our time frames? You know, like we've done this in the past and I'm sure it hasn't taken this long. So what was the
Guinea pigs.
Yeah, I just want us to get some enlightenment over the whole length of.
I think we have to, my suggestion is that, or recommendation, sorry, is that let's get over this and then we get into a space where we can reflect.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, that's probably what I wasn't for this meeting, but it's just to appreciate the time, the stress, and the process, and how we may achieve it in a more calmer manner, maybe if that's possible.
Yeah. And I'm sure Renee and her team will be happy to participate in that debrief process and so that we can best understand what their perspective is on matters.
And what we need to do better, if there's something that we can do better, understand that, how we might achieve that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all I had to.
No, we commit to a debrief, and I know you'll be happy to participate in that, won't you, Renee?
Definitely, yes.
Oh, thank you.
And I guess that's speaking to the point of there were a number of options that were outlined by the Minister in terms of what you do about your consultation document and your long-term plan. In hindsight, it's always a beautiful thing looking back in terms of should we or should we not have extended, etc. So I'm looking forward to what comes out of that debrief. But it did, from my perspective, feel like it was potentially more of a journey than it has been previously. Correct. Okay. All right. Let's go to more questions on the parts of the report that have been provided for our consideration. I'll ask with Lani, and this is for you in relation to the increase of the ratio to 175%. So when we had discussed that at an earlier hui, which may have been December, I'm not quite sure.
January.
Oh, it was January.
Yeah.
Okay. And so within the documents, it talks about needing to. So had we actually approved it to go to the 175 at that stage? And by we, I mean council.
So it was in the January council meeting that they approved for it to go to 175.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I'd imagine there's going to be quite a bit of cordial in relation to the balanced budget in part 2. Or maybe Fire Joanne's already opened that can of worms.
Madam Chair, I think Renee might have her hand up.
Over to you, Renee, thanks. Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, we can't hear you.
Apologies, can you hear me?
Yep.
I omitted to mention these 2 emphasis of matter paragraphs in the audit opinion. I just want to highlight that as well. We've got the uncertainty over the capital delivery program, and we've got the unbalanced budget note as well. So you'll see on our page, it is on our first page of the audit report. I just wanted to highlight that as well. Thank you.
Renee, just on that, in terms of the emphasis of matter, so it's good that that you had pre-raised those earlier on in the process. Were there any other significant things that were raised that the team has managed to deliver information to mitigate those concerns?
No, it was only these 2 that we brought to our hot review process, as well as our opinions review committee. We obviously provided them all the information supporting, our assessment on these 2 matters, and they concurred on that and approved the 2 EOMs. So there was nothing else in that space.
Okay, thank you. And can you remind me what your definition of financially prudent is again? I'm pretty sure it's in the pack somewhere. I was just trying to find it, but I couldn't.
I'll also just have to quickly look for the correct wording. If you'll give me a minute, maybe go to some of the questions, I'll quickly look for it.
Goodbye, thanks.
Madam Chair, in part 4, where you talk about the awareness campaign that's going to happen in the education and consultation period, which you just touched on, Is the same thing going to be happening in the three communities, or it's only going to happen once in relation to this long-term plan?
So I didn't understand the question.
It talks about an awareness campaign, the purpose to raise the community awareness of the issues council faces in a relatable way. What page is this? Page 39. And then it talks about education, and all of I gather when I read it, it's all about being able to consultate about the document so that people are aware and they can make submissions if they want to or whatever. Are you going to have those three things? I mean, the awareness campaign and education in Tauranga, Morrinsville and Matamata, or are you only going to have one?
So the awareness and education piece has been happening since January through to kind of last week. In terms of a speaker series that was rotated, so there were 2 events held in each rotated round. So 2 in Morrinsville, 2 in Matamata, and 2 in Tauranga. And we are, as we go into the consultation period, we are keeping a close ear to the ground around the effectiveness of that and what areas the community may still need more kind of access to information around. So, for example, we will see how the community is responding, and if the understanding of or the complexity of the 3 waters impact on our budget is what becomes topical with the community, we would look to rerun the speaker series topics and provide opportunities for engagement. So because of the complexity of this consultation document, we are trying to keep quite fluid in our engagement approach. But in those first 2 phases around education and awareness, we've definitely tried to get wide reach across the whole district.
And what's the attendance on it?
Variable. So the water one, for example, was in Morrinsville and the attendance was only about 16. There was one in Te Aroha on heritage towns and reviving the town, and the attendance on that was 60 something. So again, until it's out in the public arena and we're not and we're getting a feel for what the community want to know more about or need more education about, it's hard for us to get the conversation going.
While we're on consultation and getting the view of our stakeholders, I don't know if everyone recalls the Bird of the Year contest. And
Tiki.
Yeah, John Oliver's involvement in the Pū Tiki being the Bird of the Year for New Zealand. So the reason I raise it is I'm trying to understand when a person submits, how do we protect the process so that it's limited to stakeholders in our community? Do you have to identify, you're a resident here? And then also, what's stopping a resident from putting the same comment in different ways 10 times to try and slant the trend of consultative views?
Following that, if I'm a stakeholder in the community and Fonterra is a stakeholder in the community, how do you, the influence or the fact that they may have a writer that understands this much more than I do? So, I
can speak to the process elements of that, and then it might be good if Mayor Adrian or one of the other councillors speak to the decision making and weighting of consideration of that. But in terms of the process for somebody to make a submission and for it to be considered a formal submission, we collect demographic data around the individual. So that includes their age bracket, where they're from, whether they're a ratepayer or a non-ratepayer. It includes, I'm trying to think, so that's kind of some good base data. And that information is given to the councillors as part of their decision-making processes. It gives good context when they're making their deliberations. In terms of actually screening and stopping an individual making multiple submissions, their submission is, so there's protections in place around, we're monitoring things like IP addresses, and if it's the same IP address making multiple submissions, we can pick that up and highlight it as a quality risk around those submissions. There have been issues in the past where you might find, or there are perfectly legitimate reasons why you might get multiple submissions from the same IP address with, you know, several adults sharing a house. We have had instances in the past where you've seen the same submission effectively from mum, dad, son, daughter, that sort of thing. But again, they do appear as individual submissions and we can flag those things. But there is an element of risk in there because we collect that demographic data around every submission. It gives us the ability to identify and highlight where there could be a risk. It doesn't necessarily prevent that risk.
Thanks, Jenny. That's good context because, you know, there are people out there that have got too much time on their hands. Artificial intelligence and developing things that can actually disrupt those processes. So
yeah, and on artificial intelligence, our hearing last year for our annual plan did actually have a ChatGPT submission made with respect to our curbside, because it mentioned compost, grass clippings, and I thought, well, that wasn't in our thing, and I sort of raised a flag, and I found out afterwards that these 2 submissions were actually from the AI version. So yeah, I think the important thing to understand with submissions is they're not a referendum. I think this is where people get, they don't feel like they've been listened to because we don't do what they necessarily think we should do. And that's the challenge that we have, is that people say we don't listen, but that's because we have listened. It's just that we haven't done what they wanted, is the challenge. That's what I see in my worldview, but it's about using the facts. Applying a hearings commissioner's lens really is you've got to work with facts. Emotion, you know, you can take into account the emotion, but opinions and assumptions, when we're trying to work with facts and data to make a good decision, that's where it sits. But again, around connecting with the communities, you asked about, you know, how we do it. So we'll have an industry breakfast, and it was the big boys breakfast, as we sometimes call it. So we meet with our chambers members for the business association. We used to go to the market days, but I don't know that we're doing that this year because we didn't feel that actually captured a lot of sort of engagement. Because the reality is this is about engagement. This is what we're looking for, is meaningful engagement. Consultation is an interesting word, but it's actually the engagement that we want from people to understand and to give us that constructive feedback around their views. So that's how we do that on multiple platforms, using the internet, using emails. Yeah, it's we're open to meeting with groups if they want to meet with us. We, you know, if they've asked questions to ask, it's a fairly open, like Jen said, it is fluid, and we're trying to reach people to build that understanding. That gives clarity.
Thanks for that. And sometimes that creates risk in and of itself when you're potentially going out into the community and sometimes delivering messages that people may not want to hear.
Yeah, well, that happened last year.
Yeah, so I guess the question in that space is, what are the mechanisms to keep you guys safe when you're doing that?
To that one as well, there were some really good reflections and good outcomes from that scenario last year. So the team have developed a process around analysing the risk and what controls we might need to put in place for different community engagement events. Like Adrian mentioned, because of the complexity of this long-term plan, we didn't feel that going to the markets or necessarily running community open days or anything like that would be particularly effective in engaging residents on this, because it more needs to be about presenting and discussing and answering questions on intertwined issues, compared to in the past where it may have been more like, do you want a spa, yes or no, or should we build a cycle trail, yes or no, which were simpler conversations better suited to a market. For this time round, we have scheduled one evening Q&A session to run online to provide again the opportunity to present and allow people to ask questions, engage with elected members in a controlled environment. And we've tentatively scheduled 2 further sessions that won't be advertised again until we get that feel for what's topical and what the community is interested in.
Yeah, actually, to follow on from that, we did do one last year online, and it worked really, really well because the questions were the person online didn't ask the question; they wrote the question, and it was asked by a staff member to myself or a councillor in a effective way, and that people didn't have to ask questions; they could just listen to the dialogue, and I think that generated quite a bit of it was well received, especially after hours, because this is a challenge we have, is people working and how do we engage with people after hours when our staff are people working during the day. How much after hours work do we expect our staff to do? So yeah, balancing that dynamic is very fascinating.
So what I might do is ask if we've talked a bit about that council, the actual consultation and how that's going to work. Can I ask us to focus now our questions, if there are any, on the balanced budget, because that's a significant piece of this particular report. And if there aren't any, that's fine. But from a due diligence perspective and a governance perspective, this is a significant thing. So let's just make sure that we talk about it. Hi, Joanne, did you have anything that you wanted to ask in it?
The only thing I wanted to know, making sure that I understood from the readings and everything, I thought I understood it, and I kind of did, was that how do we, like, well, it's a council decision, of course, but, and Donna's partly answered it about how to balance for the unbalanced budget, how to balance the work that the staff is expecting to do. So if I was, and I don't know how this works, but if I was working in the 3 waters or 2 waters area and something came up in a whole different service area, you can't just move staff across to do that. They might not know that, you know, like put me here, but don't put me over there. So I just, even though the long-term plan is for our strategic view, I'm always concerned about how does Don and his staff cover the work that is expected under the plan, because the plan will only work if you've got staff that can actually do or lead or understand what it is that they are, you know, are working with.
Okay. And I think it's good that you prefaced the meeting with your report around the labour market, seeing a bit more better now.
Yes, it is. And I suppose, to be candid, some of the challenges we've had are partly attributable in terms of capital delivery. In terms of maintaining service standards, have been labour shortages, have been other influences, of course, not least of which has been shortage of contractor capacity. I think too we've been overly ambitious in our capital delivery program. Just the processes involved in preparing for setting up and establishing the right frame for a project delivery is substantially more than what may have occurred in the past. But so there's a whole range of issues. But yeah, certainly what we've done this time, and I know relative quite attentive to this particular issue, is our ability to deliver on our capital. What we've tried to do is mitigate that risk by encouraging managers to only put forward a capital program that aligned with their ability to deliver. And from a financial perspective, to mitigate the possibility of us not achieving the capital outcomes we have programmed for, we only fund 25% of the interest on the total capital scheduled for that year. In other words, there is an element of timing. Is that fair, Lani?
Yeah, just being conservative.
But that certainly, I can understand audit saying, what's the likelihood that there is a risk of you not delivering, and you've been quite candid and open, I think, about saying, well, yes, you're right, there is a risk, and there's a whole lot of things that could affect that.
Which is why we have an emphasis to matter. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah. Renee was going to give us a definition of
I think
prudent.
she did end up for it. It might be in relation to the
Okay.
definition. So over to you, Renee. Thanks.
Thanks. We've lost the camera view in the boardroom. I don't know if it's on purpose.
We're all hiding.
You'll notice a little bit when voice goes off, Renee.
I think our governance team is working on it at the moment, but we can still see you and hear you.
Okay, no, that's good. So just on that financial prudence question, so that comes from the Local Government Act. And if you want to refer to, we've got a little bit of a summary. So section 100 starts with the requirement for the balanced budget. So that's a break even. So you're not making a profit, you're not making a loss, you're breaking even with regards to your revenue and your expenses. It goes on then to section 101, which will say that, or which says there's a general requirement to manage financial matters prudently and in a manner that promotes the current and the future interests of the community. There's also a section 101A, which requires local authorities to adopt a financial strategy to guide the assessment of funding and expenditure proposals. And then it goes into section 102, requires local authorities to adopt certain funding and financial policies to provide predictability and certainty about sources and levels of funding. So that's basically where it sits in the Local Government Act.
I thank you for the context. I don't think you can see us yet. But
Is it a black screen?
yeah.
No, can't see you.
So we've got a couple of questions in the room. So I might just call out who's going. So Councillor Bruce is going to start.
Yeah, well, I'll go to this prudence thing. I believe we've had an outstanding preparation of the long-term plan. The amount of work that has gone into it from the staff and the explanations and the whole you've had a rethink. I'm comparing it to previous, all right, and I think there's been an understanding that we are in hard financial times and we have to tighten the belt, and that long-term plan, the narrative says we're only going to do the things that we really have to. We're not going to be spending the money on nice to-dos, and the community have already picked that up. Now, one way or another, I was talking to a pensioner last night in the supermarket, and she said, I don't know, there's going to be a rate rise. She said, it's going to be about 15%. I said, you're not wrong, right? And how am I going to spend? So there's already an understanding of the situation, right? And we talk about prudence. I just look at making sure that we're not wasting our money. It's that we're using it wisely.
Certainly, I hit the wrong button. So now over to Councillor Kevin.
I was just going to say, we had a really robust discussion about all this in council, and that 175 is not a target. 100%. We do not want to get anywhere near it. We can possibly get around it. It just gives us headroom in case something comes up that's untoward or unexpected or whatever. So without going through that whole process all over again. So yeah, not a target. If we can get under 150, that'd be great.
And I think you used the word in our previous meeting around it creates a bit of an insurance for us in terms of creating that headroom. And from my perspective, it's always around if there was a black swan event, did we have the headroom available and reserves or cash flow options available to actually address that to the levels expected of the community?
Yeah, and I think to add to that, the 175 is the level that we're allowed to be at. We had a voluntary 150, so
and conservative.
Yeah, and we're still better than a lot of councils.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is this is and it isn't a target, and I put the tension back to the governance to our councillors that it's for us to manage that expectation. And that because we are the governors, and so that's where that tension will sit. The prudence one's an interesting one because there's often a lot of discussion around depreciation. There's been articles in the past about councils collecting depreciation and at what level, and so it's sort of it's a beast in itself. And this is probably the first time that we have entered this phase. I was just interested in if you had anything further to add, Renee, around that we were choosing. Obviously, you're satisfied that we've answered the questions around why and our prudence to support the sections of the Act that is okay. You while it's not an ideal situation to be in, I guess in some respects, it is still a mechanism for us to manage our rates rise in this period.
Yes, I think our work has been quite robust around that, and that's one of the sections that was looked at very closely by the HOT Review and the OAG teams as well. So there was quite a lot of specialists that went over your disclosures and the work that we could do to support your assumption that you are financially prudent. And this has been cleared, so we do agree with that assumption. You do have really good disclosure in your CD document. I think it's about page either 47 or 49. There's quite a good explanation for the reader to read about, exactly why this is happening, and that is also our ERM is showing to that pages and those disclosures that you have made to your readers.
Yeah, thank you. I guess the only other question I have too is around with the risk around us not achieving the capital projects, and you talk about level of service in that dialogue, whereas for us this is about compliance, and it's acknowledging that we have to do this work in order to be compliant. We will still be running a wastewater plant in conjunction that won't be compliant until we get the new plant up and running. So that's where the risk sits. Level of service, well, the people will still be able to flush their toilets. It'll be our risk on how long it goes. Will we have to talk to regional council? That's where I think the risk sits as a council. Would you agree with that?
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, that will be that will have to be very closely watched, obviously by your team too, as things progress and this play out, to make sure, that you keep your level of service where you plan to have it.
I've just got one more question. When I was going through the section, one of the thoughts that I had was, and John probably the best person to answer, what happens if the government does something, changes its mind, has an influence on what's going on, when they withdrew what was happening with the Three Waters, and then they withdrew the smoking policy, and now you can shoot anybody because they're giving your guns back. What happens if government decides to come over the top? I mean, can we plan for that or no?
No, can't plan for it. Because the government is sovereign. We are creatures of statute and we must abide by whatever the law is. Having said that, I'd be very surprised if the government made a significant or decision that was any of significance that would entail or require major adjustment. And to be fair to the government, they clearly signalled before the election, for example, Three Waters was going to be withdrawn. They then obviously took advice from the IA and provided a mechanism whereby we're able to meet our statutory obligations by taking different routes as to the adoption of our LTP or CD. And for example, we could have opted not to have our CD audited later in the year. But we have had that, I think, sitting at this side of that process, I think we probably should be more than comfortable that we took the right decision in doing that, despite the challenges that that whole process has presented both the auditors and ourselves.
One question. One thing I wasn't 100% sure about says in the consultation document, how should a significant event occur, there is uncertainty the headroom will be sufficient. We may not be able to stay within our debt limit. Included within the headroom, we have a $5.4 million investment fund for emergencies and a $6 million credit facility for urgent cash flow requirements. Does that mean we could literally go over 175?
Well, yeah, that's all. I mean, yes, there's always a risk. I mean, you just don't know the cost of capital work might go from 45 million or whatever to 60 million. We still have to do the work.
Yeah.
Now we either have to make decisions at that point to say, well, look, this is pushing us towards the breaching the 175, and we've then got to get hold of the LGFA and make a case, and that a number of authorities have been put in that position where they've had to seek relief from the LGFA to exceed the 175 for an agreed period. And that's just the way it is.
That's kind of another headroom scenario, an escape clause basically from the 175 we've set.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where 175 came from, but I know as a household, when I first bought a home, I was well over the 175.
22.
So I think generally it will be accepted internationally. 175 is not hugely out of whack. So going to 220 or something like that doesn't put you in any great fiscal risk, I would have thought. And I mean, I don't want to be facetious or disrespectful, but the fact that you can compulsorily tax people is hugely beneficial in terms of security.
Sorry, I was just going to say to the other avenue, as our debt gets higher, council can look to get a credit rating of our own, which would then LGFA would likely look at an extension on the 175 if we were at a credit rating. Now, it would also mean we could get potentially better rates as well.
It's not a complete cap. If there is a way to get around it, if you absolutely have to.
Yeah, from what I can see within the papers, we've got options.
Yeah.
Like they pointed out. And then on page 46, it talks about external borrowing, the shortfall, or increasing rates. So, yeah. To your point, a lot of them might be more popular than others.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
And so if we just if we come back to the balanced budget for a bit, so I will admit that when I first saw that we weren't going to balance that budget, I was concerned. I will own that. But then as I started to unpack the paper and then understand the why in terms of the affordability, in terms of the approach that we were taking to depreciation, and then in terms of to your point earlier around the 5 to 15 years in relation to the sludging, I could understand it. I still think there's a little bit of uncomfort within me around something not balancing. And I think that's because we've always been taught, for those of us that remember, to balance your checkbook or whatever it might look like, right?
Yeah.
And we have many conversations about paying for our groceries. So I can just admit that although I wasn't comfortable, I can see the reasons why. And then obviously we've got external auditors to give us a bit of assurance in that space that yes, ultimately what we're doing, we've followed the process and we've got an opinion that says that we're still effectively being financially prudent in the approach that's been taken. We do also mention within the paper, page 34 out of 89, it talks about that we will closely monitor and review the risk throughout the period. So I just wanted to get a sense of what do the alarm bells look like, and we talk about it being reviewed in our budget process, etc. So if we do go off track, what is the process so that governance is aware and we can start to look at those different mitigations that we've just talked about?
I guess we do that every year as part of our annual plan review. We look at these things. Are we going to stick within our debt limits and our rate limits? So yeah, it's an annual review. We don't even lose sight of those.
So would it come through in the 6-month one that you talked about as well, or would we expect it in the annual one only?
Yeah, I guess when we're reviewing the 6 month, we're looking at those sort of, we're projecting where our debt's going to be at the end of the year. It's an ongoing thing.
There's one more thing. On page 50 of the consultation document, it says 3 waters activities. We are proposing rates will not increase by more than 25% and all other activities by 12%. I'm going, well, really? They're going to look at that and go, does that mean 27%? Like, that's a lot.
Yeah, and on that, my question on it was, well, what if it does?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because we also said that for 3 waters, not to increase by more than 7% over the remainder of the 10 years. And so just making sure, and we've done as best that we can to be transparent about that. This is where we are based on the data that we have at the moment, but we've also, in my mind, on page 51, we've said that things are likely to change. So we've tried to preface that as well. Although you don't always like to have that contingency plan in there, we just hope that we don't get to that stage. So
I'm just, to me, the red 3 waters activities going up by 25% is kind of a red herring, and maybe shouldn't even be in there. I don't know if that's a audit that said we have to have it in there, but if they're only going up by less than 15%, just tell them that. Why confuse them by having 25% in there?
I guess the idea behind that was to try and highlight the fact that 3 waters is becoming a really dominant part of our
and dominate. I mean, 25% of the increase. Is it 25% of the increase?
Yeah, it does.
No, it's a 25% increase of the targeted rates for waters.
Yeah, significant.
So if you're paying $1,000, it's going to go up by, for your water targeted rates, it's going to go up by 25%.
So if you're not, I have no problem with it. I think the public will, right? But that's gets back to the splitting of targeted rates and general rates. So if you're in the country and you don't have any targeted rate for water, right, your overall rate is your overall percentage will be less than somebody in town.
So in terms of kind of the information pack for councillors going into the consultation period, one of the things you had requested was the lowest and the highest rates increase. that's been a really difficult thing to calculate because there's a lot of factors in that. So if you had a section with no house on it, it's now got a 6-bedroom fully serviced house, the rates and the percentage increase is phenomenal. So we're working on what we can give you that might help illustrate the scenario that you're discussing there around what an average household connected to water versus an average household not connected to water, and those kind of things might be. So just looking at some different examples to illustrate that. Also, we touched on that the website will let people look up their own property, and that visually shows them how their rates are broken down. So again, if you're a water customer, you see the graph jump significantly this year around that water line. So we can kind of try and visually explain that, because absolutely agree with Councillor Tappan that explaining those rate increase limits is very difficult. But hopefully in that way where people can actually interact and see that in the context of their own property will hopefully help.
Just wonder if a slight reword would work for that. We are proposing that the targeted rates for provision of 3 waters infrastructure will not increase by more than 25%, because that is something I can now focus on. It's just on targeted rates for 3 waters. And I don't want to start changing the consultation document or anything right now, but I just was confused. I've got to admit.
What was helpful to me was that it had that statement when you changed the wording, like you just said, Kevin, or it said like the first year or two will be 15% or 12%, and then it would go up, and so all you saw was the increase of 4%, 3%, you know, like, and that was easier to handle than saying to me 25% without the thought that you're building on that.
This assumes that people understand that that's a targeted rate only. People who are getting provision for it. I think they need that potentially could be explained a little bit clearer. It just says that rates will not. The other one says for all our other activities, that rates will not. So it doesn't actually identify that it's a targeted rate.
Although the all other activities does sort of infer that, because we were talking about other activities and water activities, so it sort of infers it, but it doesn't, perhaps, isn't black and white.
It's a really nice catch. So just for context, people, we're on page 50 of the consultation document where it talks about 3 waters activities. It currently says we are proposing that rates will not increase by more than, except, and the changes, we are proposing that targeted rates will not increase by more.
The targeted rates for 3 water project infrastructure or provision of 3 waters or supply of 3 water, whatever that could be, just to explain it or weave it.
Yeah, sure. So I just had a quick word to Lady, she brought the issue up, and if it's okay, Renee, Lady, I've just cleared that with you after the meeting, just add the word target rate in.
I just want to get a sense as just the word targeted or more, because it does sit under general
3 waters activity.
Yeah.
So targeted is probably fine.
Okay, so I just want to check around the table too that there's a level of comfort with that amongst the committee members.
I guess the thing is that we're talking in this space, there's the proposed net debt to revenue, and it's got the 3 waters and all other activities that is explicit in that section. But yeah, it's only a word at the end of the day.
And just checking with the team whether that's an issue. That one word.
I'll have to talk to audit. We're kind of in the late stages, but I can't see it there.
Because the other thing is it's the targeted rate for water. It's because there's curbside. There's there are other targeted rates.
Yeah.
So this is specific to 3 waters activities.
Yeah.
So it's already split.
We could say for all other activities, we're proposing that rates will not increase by more than.
And that's already,
it's all there.
it's already there.
It's already there. Right?
It's already there. I just
We
rather
go
just
round
leave
and
it.
round the circle.
I think we just leave it because people, will just have to say, well, that's Three Waters activity doesn't take any great to those that was either.
The 7 people that will read this.
Yeah, correct.
They'll see the 25 and
Yeah.
go, shit. They'll go, they'll start asking questions. That's what I think.
And maybe the approach is to prepare for those questions that come in from the staff's perspective and have that as part of talking points for the elected members when they are having conversations in the communities.
So from the work that we've done just yesterday on how the rate increases impact, like on a range, most of I sort of broke it down into $100 increase levels, and the very bulk of it sits between $400 and $500 increase for most ratepayers. So it's probably, I think we learned that from last time too, talking in dollar terms rather than percentages.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more useful.
Yeah, that's why these percentage numbers look scary. But potentially, as you say, $400 or $500, but that makes it, they look at that and go,
But I think it was a useful conversation to have.
And just to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So we just need to be prepared for people that might view it like that. So
The reality is a lot of people will look at what they will have to pay. That's the bottom line. And when that percentage was there, it skewed it. So we've addressed that. We're trying it this way and we'll see what happens.
okay, team. So just one more comment in relation to the consultation document. There are a number of links that are in it, and so I'm just checking that it takes the people. If I didn't check the link, or whether it takes the people to the specific thing that it talks about.
The majority of them take people to just the long-term plan website, not the specific thing. Just in terms of administratively, right now we're still building that website. So even to put the short links, to create the short links, they're a false link right now because we have to publish the site before they can actually link to anything. So if anyone read your agenda in the attachments, those links would go nowhere right now. So until that site is live, we can't, but absolutely there are 2 specific links in there. One is mpdc.nz/LTP, which will take them to the consultation website, and there is mpdc.nz/rates 2024, which will take them to that search to search for their own property.
I'll just make it. Yeah, Jim, did you have another comment?
Oh, sorry.
I'll just make a final comment that I really want to do a shout out again to the team, because my understanding is we were earlier in the position where we may have had a qualified opinion, and so there would have been a lot of work that was done to get us to a space of an emphasis of matter in relation to our CapEx delivery program. So congratulations to everyone that was involved in the whole process, and also to and I meant to the Audit New Zealand team as well, Renee, Claudia and your team. And we've got a lot of recommendations to get through too. So I go back to the page. We are on page 18 of 89. So we're going to do this part by part, unless there are any further questions. No. So part 1 is that the committee receives the report, which is the review of the supporting information, and the committee reviews it and recommends it to council for adoption. Could I please have a mover?
I'll move.
Moving. And a seconder?
yes.
Councillor Bruce. All those in favour, please say aye. Okay, it's cool. Part 2 is the consideration of the unbalanced budget. So the committee has reviewed the intention to set an unbalanced budget for all years of the LTP and has considered the financial prudency of this decision. And the committee has reviewed the reasons and implications of the decision to set an unbalanced budget. Can I please have a mover?
I'll also move.
Paul, did you get that? Councillor Bruce moving and I Joanne seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Okay, it's cool. Part 3 is the review of the consultation document. So the committee has reviewed the consultation document for the LTP and recommends it to council for approval for public consultation. Mayor Adrian's moving. Kevin seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Okay, let's go with it. And the last is the receipt of the audit opinion. So we received the opinion on behalf of the Auditor General, and we received the letter of representation from Audit New Zealand on behalf of the Auditor General. Mover and seconder, please. So Adrian and by Joanne, all those in favour, please say aye. Okay, carried from that. Well done too. We knew it was going to take a while, but again, thank you to everyone that was involved in the process and realise that there's a bit of the journey to go to. So good luck. All right, so we are moving on to 8.6, which is the draft revenue and financing policy. Over to you, Nania.
I feel like we've talked about this many times now, but basically the main changes in the revenue, the council's been thoroughly through the process that you need to go through to adopt the revenue and financing policy. We made a couple of tweaks to the previous policy in terms of council were looking for more user pays. So that's now reflected in our when the fees and charges come through. And then there were some activities where we've kept the balance of fees and charges to rates the same, but we needed to, we'd sort of fallen behind. So we needed to bump up how much fees and charges we were charging to meet the ranges we already had. So they were the main changes. And then also in the revenue and financing policy, we've tried to better explain the tool about when we would use the UAGC cap as a tool and in what circumstances we would use it. So they're really the main changes made to the policy. Any questions?
On the page, thank you, Lania, on page 43 of 89, it talks about the preamble to Te Whenua Māori Act. And it talks about the options provided by Tautuara. So do they provide many options or one option, and that's the option that we're taking?
It was sort of the recommended.
And in terms of the recommendation, is it to, which is on page 41, it says receive the report and review it in a corresponding statement of proposal. Is the expectation that we also send to council, or?
Yeah, so my understanding is council will adopt it tomorrow.
So do we need to include that in the recommendation to off to council for approval?
Yeah, that would be useful.
Okay. So if there are no further questions, so we're receiving, we're reviewing, and we're recommending, I guess, to council to adopt. I'll move.
I'll second.
Hi, Joanne, second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's common. And now we are on 8.7. Is that you, Nani? You're not on here. That's
No. That's not me. Susan.
Susan's there. Oh, no.
Give us those.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. The development contribution is planned to go out consultation alongside the long-term plan. There hasn't been many changes since I think it was brought to the committee last time. We've just made sure that it's been peer reviewed by our legal professional as well, just to make sure that we're in line with our requirements. Happy to take any questions.
Question team, DCs. While people are thinking of their questions, I just wanted to get a sense of when we talk about what DCs do cover, i.e. water, wastewater, roads and stormwater, but not the community infrastructure.
No, and that's one of the things we have looked at trying to highlight, made a little bit clearer in this development contribution policy, that the financial contributions are collected through the district plan for community facilities, and that hasn't changed, but we've just tried to make that very clear, because we do get quite a few people querying that, because they get issued for both of those costs, but they are actually under separate mechanisms. Yeah.
Do we still get funding from Waka Kotahi?
Not through the development contributions, so yeah, no, not for these projects. These are for growth funded.
No, it's just it talks about Waka Kotahi.
Well, yeah, it's the major risks to budgets and policies that's set out.
I thought it might have been NZTA.
And I guess that's just talking about the risks to the budgets.
Yes.
Yeah, if there's no.
I've got one more. So with the preamble of Te Whenua Māori Act, was that this was also relevant to the DC policy, and was there advice on that too from Tautuara, which is the same advice? And we're doing that too? Sorry, I'm trying to answer my own question.
I think I've had that specifically checked by our legal advisor, and there wasn't anything that came through into the development contribution policy. Nothing specific on that.
Okay, back to you, Mary. Are you?
I was just happy to move.
Yep. I'm happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's cool. Thank you. So, as Mayor Adrian calls you, we are on.
Yeah.
You're in trouble when you caught something.
We are on the draft rates remission and postponement policy.
I guess nothing dramatic changed in this policy from last time.
So I have to move if there's no question. Second.
Okay, all those in favour, please say aye. Okay, cool. Carried. That was the easiest piece of maybe. Well done.
It shouldn't need much tweaking, really.
I feel like we've talked about it so many times.
Okay. We are. I don't think Kate will be here yet. Then, so maybe, yep. So maybe we can go to 8.12, which is our work program.
So were you wanting to add in there the policies?
Yeah, in the future, it would be good to have an understanding of the trajectory of the policies and which ones are coming into within here, so we can also get a sense of not having too long an agenda, if that makes sense as well.
Yeah, so following that earlier discussion, we sent a quick email to Niall for when he gets back from holiday to work out between all of the various managers who own the policies which ones they think should come to risk and assurance. We thought we'll just have a conversation with Jadine ahead of time and then be able to work those into perhaps your September and December ones and then into next year's work program if you're happy with that.
And I guess the other part of it as well is I still haven't wrapped my head around if a report is due in a particular meeting. So a perfect example being the IT security audit.
That was June last year.
I guess my question is, other than the person who is responsible for a particular report saying it's not going to be at that meeting, we'll put it through at the next one, what is the more of accountability process? Because we're expecting it at that one. And I think it was more relevant for the Lagoima one because we had quite a long conversation about Lagoima previously, about not having it too early. And then we decided on where we wanted it, and now we don't have the Lagoima report. And Lagoima request also came up in the performance measures. There were 4, I think, requests that didn't meet the time frame. So what does that accountability piece look like?
Yeah, so I guess for the work program, the governance team seek the advice of that person as to whether it's ready or not. So if we get any explanation, it's certainly included within your commentary. So we can ask the relevant managers the reasoning why. Sometimes it's staff are unavailable and we can add those kind of reasonings if you like. Or what are the ramifications, I guess, longer term if we are able to grab those.
And I just wondered from a chair's perspective whether it's simply a message to the respective chair of whatever committee or even the council that this report was on your work program, it won't be coming, and this is the reason why. So the chair has more, and it doesn't necessarily need to be expanded on within that report.
Yep.
Maybe let's handle it that way.
Yep.
Until we figure out something else. Any other questions in relation to our work program? Otherwise, our recommendation is that the information be received. I will move. Can I please have a seconder?
I'll see you.
By Joanne, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, Corona, carried. Jonah, I think we have Tracer. I think he's going to.
Madam Chair, if I could just note that this will be the last time Kate as health and safety. She's been promoted to oversee both human resources and health and safety. So well done to Kate. And that was subject to external advertising. So I'm very pleased to see Kate take on that role.
Congratulations.
You will still see me writing and presenting these reports, so.
Oh, I didn't realise that. Oh, that's good. We don't have to replace you.
Cost saving. Number
I think there's some other elements there, but anyway, congratulations, Kate.
So yes, so thank you. Over to you in terms of the brief summary, and then we'll open it to the committee for questions. And congratulations, and also especially running the gauntlet with external candidates too. So awesome work.
Thank you. As always, it feels quite late in the piece to be presenting the quarterly report from last year. I guess there's been some progress since then. And if I look at the objectives at the back, there are a couple of not started ones there around policies that we are now really well underway with. So that's pleasing that we've made some progress with those. I think one of the key things here is actually around competency, critical risk assurance activities. So we've started this program of doing quite targeted audits, and that's been working well. We're developing the templates as we go along rather than trying to get a whole suite of them sorted out up front. And so one of my team has been going out regularly to do critical risk assurance audits, and you can see there's something in the January update around those. So that's really just making sure that we focus on some of those key risks. I'm happy to move to questions if you have anything that you like.
Okay, question time.
Together, when I read the report about the splash of the chemical in eyes, they didn't use the safety gear. They knew all about it, but they didn't use the safety gear. If that's
so that was part of it, yes. And it's always interesting when something goes wrong, how much learning we have. And of course, we know that when we look at the hierarchy of control, wearing PPE is the least effective means of control, and that's partly because it requires the person in the moment to put it on. And so quite a lot of the follow-up that team have been doing is actually looking at that task as well, and how they can redesign that. The task that they were doing there was a workaround because a piece of equipment wasn't doing quite what it needed to because the material wasn't behaving quite in the way that it needed to. And this is often the case, that we make sure that we look backwards and see, well, in terms of the system, how can we set people up for success as well? So that was one of the elements of we're trying to make some higher level fixes as well to have that happen again.
And I was really concerned about the behaviour, abuse, aggressive, threatening, inappropriate behaviour towards the staff. And is it increasing? Is it,
So I think from the customer services team point of view, touch wood, it's slowed down a little bit this year so far, but we are bracing ourselves that may pick up again over the course of this year. I think last year was particularly tough. The middle and last quarter of the year were hard for the customer services team. This is a national thing. This is not just our district that's suffering. So we've been doing a lot of work in that space. And one of the things we do now is meet with the police monthly. And we rotate those meetings around the district so that we can actually get a bit of a take from them around each of those specific sites.
And that's actually been going really well.
Was there any particular thing, like I can imagine people's frustration, not directed at the staff member, but the staff member that's on services, like the desk will pick up the frustration when we go to them about the rates increase if they ask that. Is there any particular thing in this that you have looked at? Was there anything outstanding in what the council was doing, or?
I think the solid waste transition was one of the factors. The curbside collection, and some of that was, wasn't always under our control. But yes, that was definitely one of the factors.
I was going to make the same comment. It saddens me that behaviour one is 3 times more prevalent than minor bleeding, bruising, blood nose, bumps and scrapes, which are normal everyday accidents and things, and it's 3 times more prevalent than that.
Okay, one of your graphs shows reports, and it says near misses and hazards. Right? Now, what do you define by a near miss, and who reports them? If it's somebody that's working independent alone and they have a near miss, are they going to come running in and making a report, or how
Wasn't their fault, am I?
No.
So this is a question that staff often ask when they're deciding which category they report, whether things are an incident or a near miss. And the reporting form is the same for the two. So we collect the same information between those two. And I think most of the time when an incident happens, it is a near miss. So something, in other words, could have potentially gone wrong that actually caused somebody to be hurt. And so I don't really worry about differentiating them too much. So I say to staff, I don't mind. The reason why staff will report them is they know that it gives us an opportunity to capture any learnings. So if something happens and somebody thinks, oh, that could have been really bad, I'm going to talk to my manager and they need to do some follow-up. Then putting it into the system ensures that follow-up is captured and can be followed up.
So my question is so you're confident that you're getting a good level of participation by staff in that reporting process?
It's very hard to know what I don't know. But yes, I think it is. And some of what we see as well is, for example, we have a George from the health and safety team. He's working with the Three Waters team a lot. The guys have got to know him, and so they feel comfortable saying, George, can you just come out and have a look at this? Sometimes he's the one who might put it into the system, but they've flagged it up with him. So I think we do okay with reporting, but I couldn't say hand on heart that I know.
No, it's just one of these statistic things that interest me at times.
Anyone ever made an observation about safe?
It's safe. Yes,
safe 0.
Yeah, so thank you. Where I was going with my question too is that because we do a bit of work out, to your point, George goes and works with the Three Waters team, but we still got 0 safe observations that are reported. So to me, it's okay, what are we doing in that space? Because that's I would have expected more.
Yes, and I have actually, I think perhaps that comment's been made here before, and I have fed that back, particularly to managers, that I think it's great if they can capture what is being done safely. We probably capture good performance and safe things more through our audits and site visits, and they don't show up as an observation here. So when we go into a site visit, the very first question is what's going well. And there's usually quite a lot that's going well, and we capture it in that way. So it doesn't necessarily show up in the statistics in that section.
a way that can be entered in there as a number, because it would be really cool to have some of the good stuff in there as well as the not so flash stuff.
Because we're going to ask that question each time. I think it's not the first time that we've asked it as well. So it would be, let's reward or let's demonstrate or show that the success that we're having in that space.
And the zero I want to see is lost time for injuries.
I guess the fascinating thing about it, it's about events, number of events and observations. So we always look to swing to the negative rather than the positive.
Yeah.
And does safe belong in there, given that nobody's reporting it? If there's no accident, then presumably they're operating in a safe manner, and it's the audit process that picks up the safe observations at the end of the day, isn't it? So does that safe have to be in there?
It's the Kiwi way, isn't it? You don't go and say, "Oh, I saw such and such. He put on all the PPE gear before he went and did that, did everything perfectly. I should report that as a safe observation." They won't do it.
It can become a little bit of a numbers game. So I could go through all the sites safe visits that have been done, and from each one pick out 3 or 4 positive things and add them to the numbers.
And that's again, that's not the point of it.
Yeah.
So that's where I wonder why that
and that's an excellent question. So that's just the way the Damstra system that we used was designed. That an observation could be safe or unsafe, but potentially we could remove that. I can find out whether we can remove that and then we reflect good stuff somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing with the audit process, rather than you having to go in there, because this is for staff to record an observation, not for you to record an observation.
Yeah.
So if there's,
I'm good with it not being.
Well, to fire Joanne's point earlier around the resource needed to do particular things, if there's not necessarily a need that's going to change the dial on something, let's ask the question, do we need to report it, knowing that we've got another process that exists in parallel that's doing that. Then it would be a manual workaround to bring it up.
Yeah, perfect.
I have a question around the fatigue policy. Now, Don raised it earlier in relation to the people who are working, the specialist area of water, and then when I know that there was some question about, because it's been raised at the table a couple of times before, because there are limited staff within that area that know what to do. And I gather some of those people are involved in this. That's why the fatigue policy is here, but I could be wrong. Are there other areas that we have, like people driving that is unsafe, or because there's a driving policy as well? Interested to know how that is made up.
So you're asking specifically about fatigue. So I guess the water and the wastewater operators are the ones who tend to do the most work at night, and so they're the most visible in a way in terms of the numbers. But we do have some other staff who work at night. We know that risk of fatigue is higher because of our circadian rhythm. It is worse when you work at night. So we have one particularly who does street sweeping in the CBDs, and actually we're just reviewing that risk for that role again, and we have done so before. I think the worst scenario we face generally is when there's some kind of emergency, like a water mains break, and then that impacts on the KVS team as well and our contractors. So what we're proposing in the new fatigue policy is it will actually quite specifically talk about how fatigue needs to be managed in that emergency situation, which is out of the ordinary. So part of it is about, making sure we have good scheduling, but this actually also talks about how it's managed in an emergency situation. Don, who am I missing? There'll be lots of other people who potentially would work long hours, but tends to be
there are management staff who work very long hours, and I think we saw evidence of that through the LVP. I think there's a differentiation between physical fatigue and mental fatigue, and there's some of the situations we get into one or the other, and that's even, we know, for example, water operators don't normally, it's not a physical fatigue in the true sense of the word, they're not doing physical work, but they are staying up long hours. And so it's really quite situational based, or in some ways. So it's very hard to write a policy, I think, that covers all the elements.
The other team, of course, especially this last few months, that does tend to work longer hours is the mower operation. Very seasonal work. They tend to be,
especially now into Christmas. Trying to get on top before.
And I've been quite clear with them. I would rather defend a bit of grass not being mown than trying to defend the fact that somebody's crashed and been killed in a mower accident because they had to work extra to mow that particular bit of dirt. And I suppose one of the things that occasionally frustrates me is that sometimes people don't like to, and I'm being, they're motivated by the right thing, they want to do the right job, they want to finish it off, they want to make sure everything's okay, and they push past that boundary that we're not comfortable with. I'd rather defend operational shortfall than somebody being harmed by fatigue.
Just read a little bit further. Of the 47 observations of unsafe, 28 of them were actually fatigue, and they get automatically put in if they work more than 56 hours without a night off. So
we're doing some work on those figures at the moment as a matter of interest, because I'm not suggesting that doesn't happen at all, but people get paid minimum 3-hour call out when it's a matter, and so you have to look beneath the figures to some extent, and that's not being disrespectful to anyone, because these guys work hard. But we need to be very clear on what it is we're measuring and how we're measuring it. And I also think, and I don't think I'm being unreasonable here, I also think we have to be very clear in our expectations as to how staff will behave in those situations as well. There is a degree of self-responsibility.
To some of them, are they, those fatigue jobs in minimum 3 hours, are they fixable like on a computer? It's on a computer and remotely do something?
Yeah, well, we've done a lot of work in terms of the water and wastewater space, for example. We've done a lot of work on upgrading our SCADA system. There's still some getting in, but it's basically pretty operational. Kate, is that your understanding, the SCADA system?
I couldn't answer that. Sorry,
I can comment that. I know that things that they would previously have had to go out for, they can now do from home. Now, we're not fully automated, and to be fully automated would be another $5-10 million. But we are at a stage.
Down the track.
We are at a stage where people don't have to leave their home.
And that's part of what we were looking at with the changes to the policies. I think that reporting requirement is a little bit of a blunt tool, maybe. So trying to make that something that actually is maybe more useful for
better reflect
alerting us when there really is an issue.
Yeah, I think you've talked to us about that before in terms of someone could receive a text, they log on, they do something that takes less than a minute, but that will still be recorded. And,
3 hours.
And then to the extent of, because the wording says on page 77, operator works more than 56 hours without a night off. And so when I first read it, and then I started to think, okay, so that would have been rostered to do a particular thing.
And we
they're on
do
call.
Yeah,
They're basically on call.
we have stand down periods after weekends.
So just on, just on the report on page 79, it talks about the trial for ACC. So I'm just recognising that that's in the report and looking forward to seeing what the outcome of that particular trial will be. and hopefully that's a good win for staff members. I'm curious in relation, and it's good that Sandra's in the room, about policies, because on the policy paper it talks about a health and safety policy last being reviewed, I think, in 2021, whereas when we do the health and safety policies in this paper, it doesn't mention that particular policy. So it's just trying to figure out how we joined those two up. So just something for consideration. And then I'm quite curious to know, and yeah, Adrian, you might know the answer to this, in terms of the, societal political polarisation, the measures that are in place to keep you safe here. I mean, I know that there are additional buttons, etc., to get through the door, like other panic buttons, all of those different types of things. Have there been a run through?
Yeah, we have done a bit of a role play around what we could do.
I inadvertently,
Oh, yes.
Madam Chair, broke all the rules and came in when we were doing a submission to the council, and I just looked at the girls and waved at them, and they opened the door for me, and I walked in and sat down until Adrian said, "Get out." Oh, okay, yeah, I'm supposed to be out.
Yeah,
but it was, David, no, I'm very friendly.
It was just a procedural matter that Joanne was in the room when we, and it was like, and but they know you, so you aren't a risk to us, Joanne. That was on a different scale, but we have had some training. Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think what was proposed that we could do, well, even the person said would just follow you out the door. If we wanted to exit out here, they'd just follow us. So it is quite an interesting space to
It's always good to remember that and to practice that as well. So it's all very well having a piece of paper that says this is what we're going to do, and then something actually happens. So what do we do again? It's just like when you jump on the plane and they do the safety briefing at the start, and they always tell you to listen to it, even if you fly regularly. So practice makes perfect.
It's a good test as well, whether what you think will work.
It's funny how you react, because I just immediately stood up. I don't know why, but it was just my reaction was to stand up. As whether it's because when you stand, you're more physically present or something. I don't know, but anyway.
I just wondered why that was one of the reasons for the change in configuration in terms of.
Well, that's helpful. It actually is helpful because you can see who's in the room, whereas before we couldn't.
And the only general observation I'll make about the report is sometimes when there are investigations, etc., that are overdue, I still don't have a sense of what risk it creates to us that they are overdue. So it's good that they're reported, I just don't have a sense of that. So that's something that maybe we could look at in the future. Other than that, are there any further questions in relation to the report, which I'm guessing that we are?
So we'll put some thought into that.
Imagine that the recommendation that we received. So I'm happy to move. And second, and by Joanne seconding, all those in favour, please say aye. Okay, it's Komana. Congratulations again on your new role. Excellent. And I think the last item on our agenda will be Roger and insurance. So welcome, Roger.
That's right, in November we were talking about it, weren't we?
Yeah, so just while Roger's getting us set, so from my perspective, I thought that we had resolved that we would agree to carry on with what we were doing in the insurance space, but the committee members raised a number of items that they wanted more review about in terms of the approach that we took for specific buildings. So this was just looping back around and understanding where we landed on that point. So kia ora.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, good afternoon. So this is just a follow-up after the last October committee meeting. I'm sorry it's taken so long to get here, but we've particularly January and early February trying to get the sign-off and all that through. So it was an internal process. Subsequent to this, the writing this report, I was at an insurance advisory group meeting last Thursday. We meet 4 times a year, and that's the 10 Waikato councils and their representative. I haven't had the opportunity, although I can get through to my manager, I now report to Fiona. supposed to deny it under the restructure. So she has got a copy of it, but at this stage it hasn't gone to the executive. So I can give you some general ideas from that, but not the detail at this stage. So the majority of our insurance was renewed 1st of November last year, fully insuring all property as under the direction of this committee. And there is a table included in this report of the total amount of premiums this council's paid over the 12-month period. $1.1 million. There has been some work done over the last month or so with the other, and I'm tabling this information. A number of councils are finding it unaffordable, the premiums, and there's going to be some ongoing work to deal with that based against the risk. So that it's still an ongoing discussion amongst the Waikato councils. Do we insure? Do we not insure? How can we mitigate the risk? So that is still an ongoing process to do that. But at this stage, we are fully insured. The change was on property where the excess went from $10,000 to $25,000. They're the key changes. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Just wondering whether the committee members remember which specific properties they mentioned in their October meeting. I think by Joanne, you were talking about some of the community buildings and where the expectation was for council to insure or for the whomever else.
It was the community halls.
Yeah. May I just say about Hairiri Hall? Because since the last committee meeting, I think you all know that Hairiri Hall caught fire just before Christmas. Total loss. Because of the condition of the building, we had to demolish that night. It was in a really hazardous area. So if the wind got up, the roofing arm would have gone for Africa. The insurance company still have ownership of that land, and the demolition starts next week. Now there's been some complications with that, but it is a contaminated site, so it's what they call a dirty demolition, where they have to take the topsoil off as well because of asbestos products in there. Now it's been within the insurance overall of that property. You've got demolition, renewal, content, and a rebuild similar. Now, the total amount will not cover the cost of rebuilding that. The demolition is double the nominal allowance we've had for demolition. So that will actually reduce the amount we can spend on the rebuild. I have met with the Halls Committee last month, and they are considering as a group whether they want to rebuild at all. It's actually an isolated site now. I've been in contact with NZTA. They're not interested in purchasing that land, even though they own all the land around that site. So it would then become an isolated paddock that this council may have no use of. So I'm just working through
It's not big enough for anything.
Starts to Lanson Bridge.
Yeah.
But you have to clear the dirty site.
We have to clear it first.
So in relation to that particular site, I'm trying to understand from an insurance perspective whether the insurance that we had in that space was
Sufficient.
The right, yeah.
Inappropriate, because a lot won't
Appropriate.
rebuild. Like this is the thing with rural halls, is the cost of rebuilding a hall these days, and because of our proximity to town, it is very much in the hands of the community as to what they decide to do. But it's the insurance will not cover a rebuild.
The insurance is based on a like for like, and of course that building was clad in Hinurira stone, which obviously will be expensive to rebuild like for like. But a farm shed may be cheaper. What the insurers will consider is a payout on the basis that we will build a similar building of similar use within our district. Not necessarily real, and that's what we did with Harris Park next door here when that fire was 8 years ago. And we were going to put a different Exonu toilet up there, and the amount payout there was reinvested. I think it actually went into Silver Ferns Event Centre as a community building.
Indoor bowls.
So I guess my question from, potentially an outside looking in perspective is, in terms of the portfolio that we have that is being insured, have we gone through, can we get a sense of assurance that we've gone through and we are happy that the insurance is appropriate, especially given some buildings that we might not want to do anything with moving forward?
That is a work in progress at this stage. If I just throw out one sort of idea, this council has, I think, 18 community halls. We'd be paying a premium on that. I can't tell exactly what it is, but do we say, well, actually, we're not going to insure community halls? That premium we will set aside nominally, and the risk of having total loss of a hall maybe 1 in 5 years from one of them. So paying premium on 18 of them over 5 years, would that be sufficient in a purse to fund the rebuild of a community hall? And they're the sorts of things we've got to do some work on.
Yeah, it's the cost of demolition is the big one now, and especially if there's asbestos, that adds its complexity in its own.
Right. And so the paper that you were talking about earlier, or the work that you were talking about earlier, that will take into account what you're talking about now?
Yes.
Okay. And will that then come back to this committee later on?
This committee, yeah. Realistically, it could take 2 to 3 months to get that far because we're working with the other councils as well.
But we did discuss this with Mania, we over that, which buildings should we and shouldn't we? So it was quite a long, robust discussion on that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're just coming back again to kind of see where we landed in that space. And what I'm hearing is it's a longer journey, and we'll see what you reckon. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to move to the recommendation, which is that the information be received, which I will move.
I just have one question, just the risk pool, that money that was called on us, that's coming back next year, eh? There'll be some more next year potentially. Was it one off, that risk pool where with the councils and there's a shortfall?
Potentially, it could be another claims, national claims, historic national claims. There could be.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years before they have wound up all the accounts for all the accounting years. And if I've just added some relatively good news, found out on Thursday that the CPI on insurance premiums as of last September was about 6% per year. So that's a lot less than last year, which was 15%.
Oh.
So.
That platform moving.
And I'll see the
Adrian seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Okay, cool. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Oh, we actually.
Okay, I might close out the music here if that's Me iwa tata kia tau ngā manakitanga te mi ngā ro ki rua ki tēnā o tata. Ki mahia te hua mā ki hiki kia toi te mana toi te reo Māori kia tūturu ka whakamaua kia tēnā. Let the strength and life force of our ancestors be with each and every one of us, freeing our path from obstruction, so that our words, spiritual power, love and language are upheld, permanently fixed, established and understood for together. Kia ora tātou. Thank you.